It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. A naval deal is done between Ukraine and Russia for a pause in fighting in the Black Sea after 2 days of negotiations with the US.
These are the first steps, not the very first, but initial ones with this presidential administration towards completely ending the war.
The Chancellor says she'll focus on defence as well as growth as she prepares to deliver her spring statement tomorrow. But tonight, the suggestion of even more cuts. Dismissed as a glitch, the US President says no classified information was shared in a major data breach by his top team.
We pretty much looked into it. It's pretty simple, to be honest. It's not, it's just something that can happen.
Also tonight, the network of online gangs preying on young girls. The warning from authorities to parents to protect against the con.
The final thing was asking for nude pictures, and he'd also sent pictures to her. This is all happening under my roof, and I'm thinking that my daughter's safe in her bedroom.
And Sky's royal commentator Alistair Bruce is honoured by the King alongside Stephen Fry, who becomes a Sir. We'll take a first look too at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. It's been an extraordinary 24 hours with a major security breach in the US by the key people who make the decisions in the Trump administration. Since taking office, Donald Trump's White House has been instrumental in negotiating deals in the Middle East and for Ukraine. And on Ukraine, at least some movement today. For the first time in 3 years, a ceasefire has been agreed between Russia and Ukraine in the Black Sea. Tonight, we'll look at what that means for Ukraine and what the preset conditions are. First, though, let's go straight to our US correspondent, David Blevins, who joins us live from the White House. So it's a start, certainly, David. What have we heard today, then?
We've heard lots of words, statements from the White House, from Ukraine and from Russia, all of them very different, Anna, because the White House is lauding this ceasefire as a great breakthrough. Ukraine, on the other hand, is asking what the penalty will be if Russia breaches the ceasefire. And Russia wants to know when the sanctions are going to be lifted. So ultimately, it's not going to be about all these words. It's going to be about the extent to which all sides observe any ceasefire. But when asked about that at a press conference earlier, well, let's just say President Trump was light on detail.
We're in deep discussions with Russia and Ukraine, and I would say it's going well, but it's a situation we should have never had to even think about, should have never happened. And on the Middle East, that's been going on for a lot of years, centuries and centuries. It just keeps going. And we are making a lot of progress, so that's all I can report. But some very, very big talks are going and detailed talks are going on right now on both fronts.
So the two sides had already agreed a ceasefire around energy infrastructure. That'll now take effect. They've added to that a ceasefire in the Black Sea, a vital shipping lane for both Russia and Ukraine. It is progress, but far short of the overarching peace Donald Trump promised when he moved in here 2 months ago. It's certainly not going to win him the Nobel Peace Prize.
David, at the White House for us, thank you. Well, our defence and security analyst, Michael Clark, has more now on the details of the deal and what it means for the war in Ukraine.
This afternoon, we got the first indication of the Black Sea Initiative, which is intended to set the scene for a ceasefire across the Black Sea. The White House was the first to release a statement announcing the agreement. And these are some of the main points. So first, they've agreed to ensure safe navigation. Secondly, the United States will help restore Russia's access to the world market for agricultural and fertilizer exports. Thirdly, they will enhance access to ports and payment systems for the Russians for such transactions. And of course, there are lots of sanctions being lifted in these last two clauses, good for the Russians. And fourth, they will develop measures to ban strikes against energy facilities. They won't ban strikes immediately, they'll develop measures to do it at some time in the future. Now, if Russia's conditions are met, the ceasefire will take effect in the Black Sea. And in the Black Sea, you can see here that the Ukrainians actually have done really very well. They have actually chased the Black Sea fleet, Russia's Black Sea fleet, out of Sevastopol, the deep water port, and they forced most of their fleet back to Novorossiysk in Russia proper. And so they've controlled the western part of the Black Sea. Ukraine even sank the Russian flagship, the Moskva, in April 2022. They've actually destroyed 24 Black Sea Fleet ships, and that's about a third of the fleet. Before the war, the Black Sea was a key export outlet for Ukraine and for Russia. And this map shows the traffic in the region with the lighter lines indicating more vessels. But watch carefully to the west of Crimea. As the war went on, look at the vessel movements once the war started. You can see how they all avoided the area. It's a major impediment to trade. Now, a maritime route, shown in white here, was opened up as part of the UN agreement to ship grain from Ukraine out via Istanbul. That was the grain deal, but Russia pulled out of that in July 2023. Nevertheless, Ukraine adapted. Because they controlled the western part of the Black Sea militarily, they were able to open up a route that hugged the coast all the way down, and they were able to get a lot of their ships out in the last 18 months or so. And this graph of Ukraine's grain exports shows how they've rebounded since the war began. So there they are. There was the level of exports they had. There was a rise. There was a big fall immediately as the war began. And now they're almost back to where they were in pre-war levels. So the point is that this ceasefire precursor deal, which is all we can call it at the moment, is rather more favourable to Russia than it is to Ukraine. It will do Russia more good than it does Ukraine. And when we look at all the various details in this agreement, you realise that actually there is less to it than meets the eye. And what does meet the eye is not really very favourable to Ukraine. That's where we are this evening.
Michael Clark there. Well, the Chancellor says national security as well as growth is at the heart of her spring statement, which she will deliver tomorrow. Rachel Reeves is being accused of driving a return to austerity as she tries to fill a funding black hole. Let's go live to Downing Street and our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who is outside number 11 for us. And details just released in the last few minutes, Sam. So what have you learned?
That's right. Rachel Reeves going to put defence and security at the heart of tomorrow's spring statement. Securonomics, you might remember that phrase. But I have to say, developments suggest things are not very strong and stable in the building behind me. Look, tomorrow is the spring statement. That's a curiosity. It's the moment that an independent spending watchdog is meant to mark the homework of the Chancellor, and then really the world moves on. Except that tomorrow, the Office for Budget Responsibility will find that she is going to breach the fiscal rules, the self-imposed borrowing limits that she set just last October because she didn't leave herself enough wiggle room. And as a consequence, tomorrow she has to announce some emergency action to avoid that happening. Now, we know quite a lot what's going to happen. She's going to squeeze Whitehall spending. There are some accounting tricks, but she's also going to cut welfare. But that's where the trouble comes, Anna. Now, last week, Liz Kendall, the Work and Pensions Secretary, outlined what we were told was £5 billion of welfare cuts that were going to be helpful to the Chancellor today. But tonight, we have learned, courtesy of the Times, and we've confirmed it, to the significant embarrassment of people in government, that independent spending watchdog has said, well, all the sums that you've done are wrong. You can only save £3.4 billion of welfare from the plans that you submitted last week, and you're still got a black hole. So tomorrow, Rachel Reeves is going to announce yet more welfare cuts. Welfare cuts, of course, being one of the most difficult things that this government will do. Let's see what the reaction is. So tomorrow, you will get that. You will get a growth downgrade. You will get a borrowing increase. You will get disposable income going down. All of that, Anna, all of it is not the government that Keir Starmer wanted to lead when he came in last year.
Sam, updating us there from Downing Street. Thank you. So the worrying state of the economy and the cost of borrowing for the government will weigh heavily on Rachel Reeves's mind as she decides where to spend and where the axe will fall. Sky's economics and data editor Ed Conway has been analysing the figures.
The spring statement. Note the name, not an emergency budget, according to Rachel Reeves. You want to be clear about that. She says it's mostly just about updating the economic growth forecasters, but there are consequences. Have a look at this. This is showing you the economic growth forecast last time around. So 2% GDP, then 1.8 and 1.5 in the future years. We know that the economy has deteriorated since then. So we'll get the final numbers from the Office of Budget Responsibility, but just based on what other people are forecasting, that could be a really big downgrade from 2% to 1% this year alone. On top of that, it's not just growth. You've also got higher interest rates across the economy. Again, this is what was forecast for interest rates last time, just looking out in future decades. This is what the market currently thinks is going to happen with those interest rates out there in the market, higher. So you've got higher interest rates, which means higher debt interest costs. You've got weaker growth. Put that together, and you're talking about a bigger deficit. And why is that a problem? It's a problem because Rachel Reeves has these fiscal rules, and she has only a certain amount of headroom before she ends up breaking the fiscal rules. Now, that headroom, it goes up and down, depending on what you're doing, depending on how the economy is doing. Last time around, when Jeremy Hunt was looking at these figures, it was about £13.6 billion. But then the economy actually improves in the run-up to the Chancellor's first budget, this Chancellor's first budget, and so it went up there. Then she decided to spend a lot of that money. She didn't pocket it, she spent it on more investment, more spending in the NHS, and so that took it down to £9.9 billion. Quite small as headroom goes, and we know what happened next. The weaker economy, those higher interest rates, that means that headroom has basically disappeared. So although it's just a forecast update, that has consequences. She would potentially break her fiscal rules if she didn't do something about it. So what can she do? Well, she can't. Well, she said she's not going to raise taxes. She could throw out her fiscal rules. She said she's not going to do that. They're ironclad, apparently. So instead, the only other big thing she could do is change the spending plans. Now, this is the spending plans that were forecast last time around. Jeremy Hunt just wanted weak spending in the coming years before the election. Rachel Reeves said, in October at least, 1.4, 1.3, 1.3% in the future. So she could trim that, and if she brought it down to maybe just a bit above where Jeremy Hunt wanted it, 1.1%, that would save about £5 billion. £5 billion. So back to the headroom. That you could basically whittle away through those spending cuts, OK? Gets you to zero, so you've still got no headroom. You still need to do something else. What comes in there? The welfare cuts we've just heard about recently. So welfare cuts, that could save another £5 billion, certainly some consequences for recipients. And then on top of that, you could bring back another £5 billion or so by switching some of the money from development assistance through to defence, just due to an accounting flip, really. But nonetheless, that helps out. So you're back to £10 billion. And that is likely to be one of the main focuses here, rebuilding the public finances. But make no mistake, although it's just forecasts, these are certainly very consequential changes in the economic forecast.
Well, Ed Conway will contribute to our full coverage of the Chancellor's spring statement. That is from 11 a.m. tomorrow here on Sky News. Do join us for that. US President Donald Trump has called the major data breach by a senior team in his administration a glitch and defended the officials involved. No war plans were discussed. That is the line from the White House today after sensitive information about US military plans were the topic of a text chat which accidentally included a journalist. A Senate Intelligence Committee convened today and the breach was described as sloppy, careless, incompetent, but not a one-off. Well, around 18 senior officials were in the Signal messaging service group, among them the Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, Vice President J.D. Vance and the President's National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, as well as the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who came under heavy questioning today from senators. Our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, has this report now from Washington.
Frame this story today as classified war plans leaked onto an unsecured app.
National security snafu. Snafu's an understatement. This debacle.
Their involvement in that group chat.
It was all anyone was talking about. The group chat between Trump's vice president, his top aides, and a journalist. The editor of The Atlantic magazine added to a chain on Signal, a messaging app, where war plans were being discussed. 2 hours before these strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen, a text landed with details of targets and timings. The president now defending his team and excusing this stunning security breach.
If it was up to me, everybody would be sitting in a room together. The room would have solid lead walls, and a lead ceiling and a lead floor. But, you know, life doesn't always let you do that.
Then the National Security Advisor, who seemingly invited the reporter into the group, now blaming, well, the reporter.
There's a lot of journalists in this city who have made big names for themselves, making up lies about this president.
The hearing will come to order.
2 of those in the group chat were interrogated at the Senate. National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard and Head of the CIA John Ratcliffe. This hearing was pre-programmed to look at worldwide threats, but the focus now on the danger within.
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security
Because
Council.
it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
Questions abound about possible incompetence and certainly recklessness within Trump's cabinet. But the messages also reveal a curious dynamic between him and the Vice President. J.D. Vance, publicly so supportive, but privately disagreeing with the President, saying he wasn't sure Donald Trump was aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. Then making his disdain for European allies clear. I just hate bailing Europe out again, he says, referring to how the strikes on the Houthis would benefit a European shipping route. Defence Secretary Hegseth agrees, saying he fully shares Vance's loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic, he writes. The Democratic Party is seeking to gain currency from this crisis. Can allies trust the US with intelligence now?
Look, this breach shows the risks that the Trump administration is running, both for the United States and for our allies around the world. That's why there must be accountability, and that means Hegseth should be fired and there should be a full-scale criminal investigation.
The White House is trying to play down the seriousness of this security scandal, characterising it as a minor transgression. But with lives at stake in a manned mission, it could have been so much worse.
Well, Martha joins me now. So, Martha, might ultimately heads roll because of this error, or is the president really standing by this group?
That's the big question now, Anna. There are certainly loud calls from the Democratic Party for people to lose their jobs over this fiasco. You heard in my report there the Senator Elizabeth Warren calling for Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth to be fired over this, and those calls have been echoed by other senior Democratic Party figures. I think a lot of the focus has fallen on Pete Hegseth, not only because he was one of the most senior members of that 18-strong Signal messaging chat group, but also because many people believed him already to be utterly unqualified for this job. He was a long-time host on Fox News, but had never held a government job before this. He's now in charge of the Department of Defence and its 2 million employees. And one thing that's important to remember about all this is these strikes on the Houthis in Yemen were not drone strikes, they were manned attacks. So American military lives were at stake here, and it could have been so much worse. Yes, the White House will obviously deeply regret accidentally, presumably, adding a journalist to this group. But what if it had been, for example, a Russian or a Chinese official or some other adversary? You heard also in that report Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, focusing his ire on the journalist involved. Donald Trump has also been calling the journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg, a sleazebag. Well, Jeffrey Goldberg and The Atlantic magazine, they're hitting back, defending the veracity of their reporting and also promising that there's more reporting to come. So watch this space. This scandal is not going away, much as the White House and Donald Trump might like it to.
We will indeed. Martha, thank you. Now it is a parent's worst nightmare, their children being targeted by online gangs, but for some it is a reality. Now the National Crime Agency is warning of a new and unprecedented threat from sadistic online gangs who infiltrate chat groups used by young people. The agency says groups are being used to manipulate young people into self-harming or engaging in sexual abuse to create content for their sites. A warning that Adele Robinson's report contains graphic material and references to suicide as she hears from the families who have fallen victim to the gangs.
This is an unprecedented threat. It's fast growing. We're arresting and convicting. We just need to get the message out there and protect the public.
A sadistic and violent global network known as the COM.
It's mostly children committing crimes against other children.
Online gangs targeting mostly vulnerable girls.
She's still suffering some level of trauma from it.
Even infiltrating internet support groups.
It's a way of having power over people when perhaps you don't have that in real life.
Sky News has been given exclusive access to the National Crime Agency's investigations into this network.
This is the police department. How can I help you?
And what we're hearing is a well-rehearsed tactic by part of it.
You have your parents locked up in the laundry room?
Fake calls to police in the US from all over the world to terrorise young girls they control.
Someone called them, screamed the address, and then just cut the phone. That's what they just said.
This British voice we've distorted is heard encouraging what's known as swatting.
They make a false claim to law enforcement with the aim of getting armed police to turn up at that victim's house. They're all wanting to target a young female in the USA who's refused to go along with their demands to take her clothes off on camera.
A way among many of manipulating victims.
The final thing was asking for nude pictures, and he'd also sent pictures to her and the self-harm as well.
Doing it to themselves?
Yeah.
Sally, whose name we've changed, found pictures on her 12-year-old daughter's phone. She'd met a boy on the gaming platform Roblox, who'd then asked her to chat privately on messaging app Discord.
Well, it was horrific because this is all happening under my roof. And I'm thinking that my daughter's safe in her bedroom and she's gaming. This is the kind of crimes that you would think happen on the streets.
The big dots here are the groups, and each of the lines is a member between different groups.
Jordan's an open-source intelligence investigator looking into the network.
So some of them are like, they're happy to kill a cat, but they're not happy for someone to be extorting someone. So they have different dynamics.
And he's witnessed one of the darkest methods they use.
Members of comm groups will look for people who are suffering through mental health disorders, eating disorders, self-harm, to try and recruit them into being able to make content for them. So that can be anything from cutting themselves with like brandishing certain names, and they will recruit from places like online and forums.
Most of the offenders are boys between 11 and 18 years old. And in their groups, they collaborate, even compete to cause harm.
One of the suspects, he admitted that he would get very angry, and he sort of said he wouldn't ever go and start a physical fight with someone, but he can go online, and that's what his strength is, and he can use his online skills to hurt people without ever having to leave his bedroom.
Keeley then shows us this disturbing post giving public tips on how to target and coerce.
There was a clear leader of this group, and he posted a blog post online, basically coaching others to do what he did. He says she would be nothing but a mere soulless body once you're done with it. She will have given up.
He's talking about children here.
Yeah, young girls. That's who he's targeting.
That's it. Insult your fingers.
But arrests are being made and offenders convicted in the UK.
This one down. You got anything on you shouldn't have?
Cameron Finnegan was jailed for offences relating to the COM, possessing a terror manual, indecent images of a child and encouraging suicide.
The only risk I was concerned about is if she went through with it and I got caught.
The longer they go on operating in this sort of way, the more likely it is we will catch up with them. The internet has a long memory, and so do we.
The National Crime Agency's seen a six-fold rise in reports of COM-related crime in the last 2 years, and it's now a priority.
It's just like in the physical world, we would recognise that there are parts of a city that you wouldn't let your children wander through at night. And so there are a mixture of obligations on, building owners, the police force, the local council, and you as a parent, and perhaps the school. So on the online world, we need to be understanding what our sort of responsibilities and obligations are and all playing our part together.
Telegram, Discord and Roblox all say they have teams proactively addressing this.
Telegram said millions of pieces of harmful material are removed daily and they've continually monitored so groups cannot re-emerge. Discord said they collaborate closely with law enforcement and will continue working relentlessly to tackle it. Roblox said they're also engaging with law enforcement worldwide. To tackle this growing threat, it must be understood to reconnect those most vulnerable to society.
That's what's really worrying about games. It's just access to your home, which makes it feel like your children are out on the streets with strangers.
Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Anti-government protesters in Turkey have vowed to keep up a campaign of demonstrations calling for the release of Istanbul's mayor, despite mass arrests and nightly clashes with police. President Tayyip Erdogan has insisted the corruption charges against his main rival, the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, aren't politically motivated. Sky special correspondent Alex Crawford has spoken to the mayor's lawyer and reports now from Istanbul.
These anti-government protests are drawing all sections of Turkish civil society. These are medics, doctors and nurses shouting, "We are protecting democracy." They're also creating unlikely allies, the ultra-nationalists side by side with the communists in their condemnation of President Erdogan's rule. He's being openly criticised. Erdogan resign, they're saying. But all this comes with risks. There have been a string of people detained for insulting the president and his family, as well as journalists jailed for covering the protests.
Since we were born, we have only seen just one president, and it's this guy. So we don't want to lose our freedom.
There's hope, and they cannot arrest all of us. We will keep continue.
The jailing of the Istanbul mayor, who's seen as the president's main rival, has incensed much of the public. And his legal team told us it's that popular support which they're banking on.
A man of such quality being arrested and detained on what we believe are baseless charges, with the lack of substantive legal merit, with no concrete evidence. Of course it's a dark day for us, and of course it's, but we always believe that after the dark day, brighter light comes. We believe that our people do not accept this injustice. They want a better Turkey. They want democracy. They want freedom. We have 100 year of democratic experience.
The country's leader here talking to students insists the corruption charges against the mayor are not political and his supporters are just causing trouble.
Those who spread terror in the streets and want to set this country on fire have no destination. The path they're on is a dead end.
The president is busy cementing relations with his new American counterpart, sending his foreign minister to Washington to set up a key meeting between the two. It's these strengthening foreign relations which observers believe has emboldened an already empowered president.
The presidency itself, regardless of whether it's Erdogan or another person in that office, is a presidency that has extraordinary powers. It has enormous powers over the judiciary. It has powers to eviscerate media. And these powers are being used all the time to erode the rule of law and human rights.
Human rights groups want an investigation too after accusations of police violence against the protesters. These are claims the government refutes, insisting more than 100 officers have been injured policing these banned gatherings.
There's an awful lot of police here trying to stop the protesters moving forward, and there have been claims that they're a little bit too heavy-handed, using rubber pellets, rubber bullets, and indiscriminately using pepper spray.
For many here, these protests are viewed as not just a fight for democracy, but a fight for the country's future generations. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Istanbul.
Police chiefs have told Sky News that a staggering number of women are taking their own lives after becoming victims of domestic abuse. The National Police Chiefs Council says it shows how deeply ingrained violence against women and girls has become. A warning: this report from our correspondent Molly Malone contains references to suicide.
Kiana Dawes, Kelly Sutton, Jessica Laverack, 3 young women who took their own lives after a history of domestic abuse. It is a tragic trend, as a new report shows suspected domestic abuse suicides have become more common than being killed by an ex or current partner. Deborah Jones runs a charity in Barnsley, working with domestic abuse victims from across the country.
We've got a lot of women that come to us for support, and I want to say that 90% of them have had suicidal thoughts. Once they've reported something that is happening to them, they're not being protected.
We joined a support session. Victims' identities were disguised to protect them. As we talked, they described the relentless torment of their abuse, being dismissed as mentally ill and feeling like they've run out of options.
We've been here for a couple of hours now, hearing from people with experience of domestic abuse. Many say they felt completely helpless. They've described feeling isolated and alone, and that they're being passed between systems and services that all fail to help them.
At Cheshire Police Headquarters, the team here work to review deaths that happen in a domestic setting. Their job is to identify the factors that can lead to suicide and help agencies improve their response to domestic abuse.
Coercive and controlling behaviour is by far the highest risk indicator for domestic suicide.
Do you think there's an understanding of what coercive control is?
I think it can be difficult.
Police say a relationship ending is another risk factor because the victim might be alone, making them feel vulnerable, while a perpetrator can become persistent.
They just want to make the lives a misery.
Just relentless.
It is, yeah.
While out with an officer doing welfare checks on victims that have protection orders in place, we saw how.
What do you think would stop him doing it? What do you think would stop him contacting you?
I don't know, really.
Do you think they work?
No, nothing works, not even this restraining order.
In the majority of domestic abuse suicides, either the suspect or the victim had been known to the police and to other agencies.
Do you accept things are going to have to change with policing, with other authorities, if we're going to stop people from taking their life after domestic abuse?
There's an awful lot for us all to do, and we were really, really keen that we work together to understand how we can prevent these sad deaths.
The government say change is needed, but accept it won't come quickly.
I wish that I could say that I will make every social work response brilliant overnight, that I will make every police officer response brilliant overnight. What we have to do is look at the fundamentals of the systems of prioritisation on things like domestic abuse.
It is a system which victims feel is failing them. Police are promising progress, but everyone agrees what's needed is coordinated action to prevent future deaths. Molly Malone, Sky News.
And if you've been affected by the issues raised in Molly's report, then you can contact the Samaritans at any time on 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Now, the actor and author Stephen Fry has been knighted by King Charles. So Stephen Fry said he was chuffed to be recognised for his services to mental health awareness, the environment and charity. The 67-year-old was honoured at an investiture ceremony at Windsor Castle. Alongside him was Sky's events commentator Alistair Bruce, who was invested as a Companion of the Most Honourable Order of the Bath by His Majesty.
So this is Companion of the Bath in the military division, and it comes at the end of nearly 46 years in uniform, most of which I've been working for Sky News. So I'm extremely grateful to my employer for letting me serve in the way that I have. So it's really great to have it. But I'm not quite sure what Companion of the Bath means. I think, in a sense, I have to bath alone still.
Congratulations to Alistair.
Companion of the Bath, did he have to hand the king his soap?
I was beginning to think the
scrub
same.
his back. I'll never forgive Alistair, though. He makes it so engaging. These big events as a Republican, I'm thinking, no, stop it. You're making it interesting. I'm enjoying it. I don't want to. Stop it, Alistair.
Oh, dear. We're very lucky to have him. Let's put
He's
it
great.
that way. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we will take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the Daily Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, as you can probably tell by now, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Mirage. So, among the stories, we'll be discussing this on the front page of the Financial Times. The headline for tomorrow's paper, Reeves to leaven a grim spring outlook with a £2.2 billion defence spending review. That to come.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. So, time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Welcome and great to see both of you. So, as ever, let's check out those front pages, shall we? Starting with the front of the Mirror. It leads with the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves' £2.2 billion boost to defence spending. The Daily Mail also leading with tomorrow's spring statement with the headline, "Don't shift blame for economy's woes, voters tell Reeves." That story is also on the front page of The Guardian, with fears of further tax raises highlighted. The Financial Times features the same story with the headline, "Reeves to leaven a grim spring outlook," with a £2.2 billion defence spending boost. The Metro says that Trump backs chump after US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz added an American journalist into a group chat discussing plans to bomb Houthi rebels in Yemen. The Star asks if the Vice President, who they call J.D. Dunce, is the most dangerous man in the world, given his remarks in that chat about Europeans being freeloaders. Front of the Express leads with a call from Sarah Everard's parents for violent offenders to face tougher sentences. Front of the Telegraph leads with a mortal blow to the assisted dying bill after implementing the law has been postponed until after the next election. So let's talk more. Kevin Maguire and Ali Miraj have had a good read through, including about the spring statement coming tomorrow. What are we beginning to learn then, Ali?
What we're beginning to learn is what we already knew before, which is that the backdrop is absolutely appalling for the Chancellor, and it's appalling for a number of reasons. She's got really external pressures coming headlong towards her. She's got a war in Europe that's still raging. She understands that the US is not going to be providing the security guarantee to Europe, so Europe has to step up now and start spending more on defence. She's going to be increasing defence spending tomorrow by $2.2 billion. That is big, on the way to increasing it to 2.5% by 2027. And also, she's got the spectre of trade tariffs that Donald Trump is going to impose any day now. And this idea that we're going to be excluded from this, we can live in hope, but that's another issue she's got to do. She's also facing paltry growth, absolutely appalling growth prospects at the moment. The OBR is set to halve the forecast to 1%, and she's also facing rising borrowing costs. So should be all pretty hunky-dory tomorrow.
Yes, and in fact, she is blaming global borrowing costs going up as part of the issue. Last October, the OBR forecast the government would spend £105 billion on our debt interest payments. That's 8% of total spending. That and faltering growth means that 9.9% of wriggle room, the headroom, has largely been extinguished, and borrowing costs have gone up since then. So that's where she's laying the blame for this, not on her budget last October.
And she could do that to some extent, although, of course, when the Conservatives would do that, and they quite rightly could over Putin's invasion of Ukraine, sending global oil and gas prices soaring. I don't remember Labour saying, oh, yes, of course, you're quite right. It's, you do the straight political attack. But it is interesting that the briefing, when she's going to, I know we're in March, but she's going to be Scrooge. She wants to play Santa in the briefings and get the spending, spending an extra 2.2 billion for defence. Of course, that's a down payment from the, was it 6.4 billion that's been promised to get up to 2.5%, 20 billion in the end. And she's emphasising it'll create jobs because she wants to get some political kickback on it. But it's going to be grim if she's got a 15 billion black hole, which the FT is suggesting she does, and if the growth forecasts are going to be halved for next year from 2% to 1%, well, it's a 2.5 trillion economy. That's 25 billion less. That's a lot of cash less from growth, because the whole ranch was bet on growth in the run-up to the general election. It was always going to be, if you recall, the highest sustained growth in the G7. That's very unlikely to happen now, I think, is the charitable way to say it. But you can see the spending. We've had Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, talking about 18,000 affordable homes. I think 2 billion was put on that, out of 1.5 million they're aiming to build. We've had the announcement on the go-ahead for a 9 billion tunnel under the Thames, although no funding. But it's going to... You've got a 5 billion welfare cut, you've got international aid cut to fund defence. Departments seem to be going to be hammered outside of defence itself and the NHS. So with a great reform programme of public services, well, how do you say reform the judicial system and law and order if you're going to be squeezing that department? You can't.
Yeah, and just on defence, which is the main thrust of the spring statement, national security, defence and growth. She says they're interlinked. She sees the extra funding being put down as a down payment for what's been offered. She says we have to move quickly in a changing world, and that starts with investment. The increase in investment is not just about increasing our national security, but increasing our economic security too, suggesting it leads to growth. The April funding increase, it says, will pay for new technologies like long-range laser and microwave weapons, collectively known as directed energy weapons, which will be fitted to warships, homes for military families, refurbished, and HM Naval Base Portsmouth will be upgraded as well. So we're beginning to see where the money will be, or the first tranche of money will be spent on.
Given in cash terms, the UK is the 6th biggest spender on defence in the world. I don't see the case for the extra spending that she's gone, but it's been triggered not by a traditional enemy, Putin. It's been triggered by a supposed ally, the US. Now you have Trump, who's kind of flipped where they are, and they're very pro-Russian, anti-Ukraine, and incredibly hostile to Europe, as I've no doubt we'll discuss subsequently on the leaked messages.
It was always a kick up the backside for Europe, and particularly for the UK. We do need to spend more on our own defence. The interesting thing, though, is that so many of the Labour MPs who are sitting on those green benches must be wondering if this is now time for the big A word, austerity. I mean, is this austerity? Paul Johnson of the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, is saying that it's not austerity. You can't call it that. It's not as severe. But a lot of Labour MPs will be thinking, well, I didn't go into Parliament to cut the welfare bill by 5 billion a year, pounds.
Hold a thought on that, because we just had the Times in. There it is. Benefits welfare bill, as you mentioned, face deeper cuts as Reeves's welfare reforms fall short. We heard Sam Coates explaining it to us already, that the cuts already announced won't make enough money, they'll fall short, so more is, deeper is to come, is the thrust of this, which will be deeply worrying for all those, both Labour MPs and those who receive these.
Well, she's already cut 1.4 billion from the winter fuel allowance. WASPy women, it would have between 3 and 10 billion.
Foreign aid budget.
They're not getting that. I think Labour MPs will be very nervous, because I don't believe this is what they thought they were being elected to do. But Paul Johnson, you're right, the Institute of Fiscal Studies did give us some political coverage, because she's insisting there's no return to austerity, because it isn't compared to what George Osborne did in the Conservative era, when I think that the welfare cuts were 12 billion, not 5, and spending went backwards in so many.
That's not what Jeremy Corbyn said today.
Well, he's right. You weren't expecting cuts, but I think on disabled people, the disabled groups say the cuts Labour are going to impose on disabled people are deeper than under the Conservatives, but across the welfare front, the cuts were much wider and deeper under the Conservatives.
They were spending a shed load more on the NHS, though, to be fair. I mean, that 22 billion extra, the 70 billion that was raised in the budget, and the fact that taxes have gone up. I mean, the thing that still puzzles me, I mean, look, the backdrop is really tough for Rachel Reeves. I understand it's not easy for anyone of any party to come in and deal with what's happening here. But to govern is to choose, and what they've done is impose a tax on workers through employers' NI. When you're now going to see the beginning of that coming through the system which is going to lead to fewer jobs out there and people shedding jobs as well. That is not supporting working people.
So do you cut, as the Times is talking about, or do you tax, which is what the Guardian is talking about?
Yeah.
Fears of further tax rises as Reeves promises to secure Britain's future.
Yeah.
Well, how will she do that? Because interestingly, Germany has got rid of its fiscal rules in order to spend some money.
Yeah,
and,
but
no, on infrastructure and defence. No, she could change the financial envelope. She could change her rules, but she's not.
Fiscal rules, yeah. But the interesting thing to remember about that, everyone's talking about the debt break in Germany being a huge thing, and it is a huge thing. They're going to spend 1 trillion, 500 billion on defence and 500 billion on infrastructure. The difference between us and them is that the debt to GDP ratio in Germany is 62%. Ours is 100% of debt to GDP. And what people don't always take account of is you can borrow tons of money when debt is, the cost of borrowing is cheap, but it does go up over the time, and a lot of that debt is inflation-linked. Yeah. So now interest cost on servicing that debt is bigger than the education budget.
But you can't cut your way to growth, because if you take money out of people's pockets or you reduce spending, there's going to be less cash in the economy. I agree, you can't go on forever and ever and ever and ever with debt, but you do it in the short term. She's got a problem with growth. You're just not going to get rid of debt. I mean, George Osborne failed miserably.
We have loads of other stories and large topics to talk about, including this in the Daily Star. Is this the most dangerous man in the world? We'll discuss that after this.
The Premier League run-in is live on NBC and Peacock as City Pride is on the line with a pair of iconic derbies.
It doesn't get any better.
April 3rd, it's a London derby. Chelsea.
Beautiful goal from City.
Spurs.
What a game!
April 6th.
Brace yourself, Manchester, for the mother of all derbies.
United.
Here the place!
City. The Premier League run-in is live on NBC and streaming on Peacock.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited.
I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting.
Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I wish we had 6.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me once again, Kevin Maguire and Ali Miraj. Ali, Daily Star, JD Dunce hates Britain, hates Europe, hates Ukraine, and could be the US president at any moment. Take it away.
Well, look, this is on the back of JD Vance having this messaging thing on Signal with Mike Waltz and various other senior figures, including Marco Rubio, where I think Mike Waltz had invited in the editor of The Atlantic magazine, which Donald Trump says is going out of business. I'm not sure that that's true. I read The Atlantic myself. But JD Vance on this exchange, and this was all about whether they were going to attack the Houthi rebels in Yemen who have been causing problems in the shipping lanes over there and diverting ships around Africa. It's costing a lot of money. And Vance was basically saying, look, do we have to do this? Because, again, the Europeans are free riding on this. More European ships are going through that channel than US ships. And there was a conclusion on this group, or Signal group, that if it was to happen, then they would be extracting more economic concessions from Europe for actually attacking these Houthis, which they actually did. Now, JD Vance is not a dunce. He's a very, very intelligent guy. He went to Yale Law School. He's had a very, very tough upbringing. He's extremely clever. This guy could be a future US president. So we can dismiss him all we want to, but the reality is that this is a much more transactional, muscular US that we have to deal with, that sees everything as a zero-sum game and who wins and who loses. And if they're taking actions against the Houthis in Yemen, they want to get some economic recompense for it.
I'm going to have to move on. I just wanted to point out that JD Vance has said he is now going to join his wife on that trip to Greenland, suggesting that global security is at stake. So I'm just going to leave
it in the US base and trying to buy the island?
Going to check out how things are there, he said.
Invade it.
In the meantime, let's just show you the Metro. Trump backs Chump. He's a good man, says the US president, after the White House aides phone app gaffe, as they put it there. But I want to move on to the Daily Telegraph very quickly. A mortal blow to the assisted dying bill. Why is it a mortal blow?
The Telegraph's been opposed, so I think it rather likes us because it won't come into force, or could come into force as late as 2029 instead of 2027 as was originally planned. Kim Leadbeater, the Labour MP behind it, has agreed this because that could run up to a general election where it could become a political issue. So will it happen, will it not? It's on the day that the Isle of Man implemented its own assisted dying scheme.
Which is in the Metro.
Which is, if you have a settled view, less than 12 months to die, rather than 6 months that would be here in England and I think it's Wales also. You have to live on the Isle of Man 5 years. So if you just fancy popping over to end your life because you're terminally ill, you won't be able to. But there's no doubt we'll see on the big vote when it comes. But there's a 55 vote majority, so you would just need 27.
That's
27.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
With too much to talk about tonight.
28, actually. 28 MPs to change. Yeah, never mind.
We'll see you shortly. Thank you both very much indeed. Kevin, Ali, thank you. Here's the weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the end of the week, I thought I said the end of the world there, but looks cooler and more unsettled than recently. But tomorrow will be mainly dry. Most places will start fine with a patchy frost, but there will be some low cloud, mist and fog around. Ireland and northern, central and eastern parts of England look most at risk, with some dense fog patches leading to travel disruption. The low cloud, mist and fog will lift through the morning to leave plenty of sunshine.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.